Folks, it's Friday night.
All right, we're
story
starting up.
time. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Egyszer elért egy körtefát. Azt mondja a körtefa neki. Engem a száraz ágattól, hogy engemet megtisztogatsz, jó tettedért kaphatsz.
What is up? What's going on? We've got a great selection for you all tonight. I found this in my house, in the bookshelf, in the Kunftar that the lady who used to live there, whose name I need to learn, left behind. Magyar Netmesek. I mean, I don't really want to open this too wide because it's really fragile. But the illustrations in here, the Hungarian folktales, we were just listening. The intro song is the Magyar Netmesek song, the Futsimdal, the bounce remix of the Futsimdal. And this book is just, mwah. And we also got some Petőfi Sándor, why wouldn't we? Összes Köteményei Második, his second collection. Let's see, this one's very interesting. Abor Filozófiája, Hamvas Béla. This is just a quick little book that's about the philosophy of wine. You can just tell from the chapter titles. The English words that have been Hungaricized are the most difficult ones. Legnehezebb. Uttohang a metafizikához apológia. Érdekes. Hogyan igyák? I think that's like how to drink. Here we got a little diagram. Sós, édes, keserű, savanyú. Savanyú, sour, sós, salty, keserű, bitter, édes, sweet. The whole spectrum. This guy wrote the manual on how to drink wine. This is one of my notebooks, the red notebook, as we call it. A whole bunch of random scribbles and thoughts from the annals. I found this one today. I think this was from the middle of COVID. And yeah. We'll see, we might get a little bit desperate, get into there. Salvador Dali. Bought this at the Budapest National Museum up on Castle Hill. Again, bunch of scribbles, but mostly blank pages. The best stories are yet to be written. But the main ticket item of the afternoon, or the evening, or the morning, wherever you may be, is The White Stag by Kate Seredy. And before we get started on that, I would like to pour a little bit of Tokai Hat Putonyos Asu, 2012, Dobogo, Isabel Twak, Nagyon, Klasszikus, Boros Csáncárga, Színe, Folyankon, Aranyat Idéz, Illatában. Oh, sounds great. I've already gotten started. Last night, as a matter of fact. And you don't want to let good wine sit too long. So egészségedre mindenkinek, and let's get started on The White Stag, which was written by a Hungarian American. Her name was Kate Seredy, and she wrote this in 1937. Now, Kate Seredy, she has an interesting story, nagyon érdekes, because she was actually born in Budapest in 1899, 1899. Moves to America thereabouts 1922. She's 23. She's young. She's trying to make a name for herself. Opens up a children's bookstore in New York City, I believe. Huge failure. But it taught her how to better appreciate children's books and really how to write children's books because she spent so much time around children's books. I mean, I don't know why it failed. Maybe it didn't really even fail. It just didn't go as well as she expected. Hosu Tördenet Ruvid. She ends up writing the tales of her ancestral homeland. She writes the tales of Hungary in English for American kids. She renames Csodasarvasról, the legend of the miracle stag, as probably most famously told by Arany János in romantic prose back in the 19th century. Kate Seredy decides to anglicize it, turn it into a children's book for American kids called The White Stag. It wins the Newbery Award in 1937, the prestigious Newbery Award, right on the eve of World War II. And that was really her ticket to fame. She also had a lot of other books. One of her most famous is also known as The Good Master, and it's about her childhood on the Alfold and the stories that she learned there. Either way, this Kate Seredy woman, exceptional individual. And today I'm going to read her White Stag, which is the story of Hunor és Magor, the origin story of the Hungarian people. Before the Honfoglalás, the Magyars followed this miraculous stag from the lands of, well, really who knows where, but somewhere in the ancient realms of Scythia, somewhere in the east, different from Europe. And these two brothers, Hunor és Magor, followed this miraculous white Csodasarvas through the woods, over the mountains, down the dells, and into the Carpathian Basin, where the Hungarians currently exist today. Now you see Hunor, you think Hunor, maybe he's Hungarian. But no, Hunor is actually the antecedent or the predecessor to Attila and his Huns, whereas Magor is the predecessor to the Magyars. Now, the connections are lost in the sands of time, perhaps, but as Kate Seredy herself says, listen to this. As Kate Seredy herself says, I gotta find this quote. I think it is in my phone. Where does she say it? Oh, here we go. Those who want to hear the voice of pagan gods in wind and thunder, who want to see fairies dance in the moonlight, who believe that faith can move mountains, can follow the thread on the pages of this book. It is a fragile thread. It cannot bear the weight of facts and dates. Wow. Thank you, Kate. And part one begins with the father of Hunor and Magor, Nimrod, the mighty hunter. Now, if you're watching on Facebook, on YouTube, wherever you may be, feel free to send some comments my way. I will always be glad to have a conversation about what we read. But now we are going into chapter 1. And the story of Hunor and Magor and the Csodasarvas roll. Egészségetekre. Oh, that's good wine. All right. Old Nimrod, mighty hunter before the Lord, leaned wearily against the stones of his sacrificial altar. There was a sadness in his face, dejection in the stoop of his broad shoulders. The altar stones were cold to his touch. Many a sun had set since the tribe could pay tribute to Hador, their powerful god. Sheep and cattle had died of a strange ailment. Game had deserted the forest and the fields. There was nothing to offer on the altar. An ailment is like a sickness, a malfeasance, something that is bothering you. So there's clearly this situation where the people of this society, with old Nimrod as the hunter, the Lord, he is overseeing a society that is sick, that is hurting, that has ailments. Once in a while, he lifted his bowed head and looked around, his eyes searching paths among the trees. His ears turned to catch the slightest noise. Nothing stirred. Silence hung heavy in the air. Then he would bow his head again and remain motionless, lost in thought for a long time. The formidable snow-capped mountains around the altar place looked down on him in supreme indifference. They knew him as he knew them. He had hunted their thickly wooded slopes almost all his life. He knew that beyond these mountains were others, peak upon peak, steep, cold, almost impassable. An army of hostile mountains. Now he remembered the years of struggle and suffering while he had crossed them, leading his people, always following the sun from east to west. He remembered the years before that, the happy years when he was young and strong and heedless, son of Cush, the great leader, the Naj Fayedalem, the time when all people were brothers and spoke the same language, the years where in their vain pride people wanted to reach heaven and build the Tower of Babel, the dreadful day of terror, when for their foolhardy daring they were punished, when brothers ceased to understand brother, when the terrific storm came and scattered them all over the earth like so many dry leaves scattered by the wind. To scatter is to just like dry leaves. Just as Kate Sarady is writing this children's book, she's also teaching English. So she uses this word scatter several times and ends with dry leaves scattered by the wind. And now you can visualize what the word scatter means. It's when dry leaves get blown by the wind, they scatter. After the storm, he and a handful of his people found themselves in a strange land, a furchafut, cold, hideg, rocky, siklosh, barren, nemtadom. For a long, long time, they suffered from the cold and from the hunger. And then came the day when he again heard the voice of God, thunder, and he was given the power to understand it. He knew from then on what he had to do. Somewhere there was a land, rich in game and green pastures, between two great rivers, plentiful in fish, surrounded by mountains, warmed by the sun, and sheltered from the cold. And this place would be the home of his people, if he could lead them wisely from east to west, always following the sun to the promised land. Many a time he thought that they had found this land, but each time Hodder spoke again, and he led his people farther toward the west. Now he was old, and soon the time would come when younger leaders would be needed. The tribe had grown until their numbers were as many as there were stars in the sky. They were strong and fearless, not a weakling among them. They would follow only the strongest, most fearless of leaders, one who could bend their recklessness to his will and bow his head to no one. Only Hadur, the powerful god. Oh, look at old Hadur. Or perhaps that is Nimrod. Either way, delightful. And here we have our first glimpse at what's to come, the Choda Sarvas. Do you know about the Choda Sarvas, the miraculous stag? I'm very interested to hear what perhaps you learned in Ishkala about this myth, about this legend, about the Choda Sarvas that we are speaking about today. So please, if you have any feeling of, well, I would like to say something about that, just write it down, send it over. I'd love to interact with your thoughts as well as my own. There were two such men in the tribe, two brothers. They were the sons of old Nimrod, Hunor, Eshmagor. They could ride faster, shoot straighter, fight harder than any other man. They could read the signs of the sun, moon, Tuz, Eshviz. They would lead the tribe toward the promised land, for they too understood the voice of Harur when it spoke in the wind and the thunder. Old Nimrod lifted his head again to scan the darkening forest around. He was waiting for his sons this evening, as he had waited for them every day at sunset since they rode away. 7 moons ago, to follow a stag, a miraculous white stag. It had appeared one day at sunset Naplemente, on the edge of the forest near the altar place. No one else had seen it, only Nimrod and his sons. No one else had seen it outlined against the western sky with the red sun setting and shining through his majestic antlers, almost as if it were supporting the sun itself. Think about that visual, the antlers with the sun coming through, and there's this glowing ball of the sun and the miraculous antlers projecting out and carrying it, perhaps like a child, as if it were a basket. Wow. Since then, he had been waiting every day because Hunor and Magor, his two sons, had ridden off to capture it. Now, as the red sun touched the rim of the mountains, Nimrod turned to the altar and, lifting his arms, sighed in prayer. "O powerful Hador, have pity on me and my people. They are suffering with hunger. I am suffering with shame, for I have nothing to offer. Give me a sign. Show me what I can do to appease thy anger." The silence was broken by a soft neighing sound. Something cool and moist touched his arm. Taltosh, his horse, faithful friend and companion of great many hunts, had come up to him silently and stood close now, his whole body trembling. Old Nimrod looked at the beautiful animal for a long time. Slowly, 2 large tears rolled down his cheek. "So I must make an offering. The greatest sacrifice is wanted by thee, Hador," he sighed. With tender hands, he patted the trembling animal's neck, then turned away quickly and lighted the sacrificial fire on the altar. Smoke billowed and hung sluggishly in the air. Smoke billowed and hung sluggishly in the air. The smoke billowing means that it rises up, it billows. Smoke, when you imagine it in your head, that's what it's doing, it's billowing. And it hangs sluggishly. Sluggishly, it's one of those words that sounds the way it means. Sluggish, it's like a slug. It's hanging there slowly, stickily. When the red flames licked through the small kindling and caught the heavy logs, he led the horse up on the altar steps. For one long moment, man and beast looked at each other. Then, with a great broken sob, old Nimrod grasped his heavy war club and, gathering all his strength, brought it down on the animal's forehead. The horse fell without a sound. Old Nimrod crumpled on his knees. He bent lower and lower and lower until his head touched the ground. For a long time, only the sharp crackling of burning wood broke the silence. Flames rose higher and higher. The crackling was submerged in the increasing roar of the fire. The sound grew, and other sounds mingled with it. Howls of wind, which sprang from nowhere, rushing of water, thundering hoofbeats, screams of horses, cries of men and women. Old Nimrod staggered to his feet and looked around with dazed eyes. From the camping ground, his people were running toward him, stumbling, falling, pushed by a terrific gale. Tents were torn from their moorings and carried away. Horses had broken loose. They ran around wild-eyed and screaming. Sparks and flames of the fire had been blown into the grass around the altar and were burning a broad path toward the mountains, a clear-cut path, a highway of leaping, roaring fire toward the west. Now thunder, frightening, long drawn-out, deafening thunder, added its voice to the tumults. The ground shook as it reached its climax with a terrific crash. People fell on the ground and lay trembling, too frightened to cry out. Only old Nimrod remained standing, a tall, majestic figure, with his arms stretched straight up to the angry sky. Wow, look at this. Look at Nimrod. Look at him go. An angry sky. Beautiful illustrations. I love the fact that she illustrated these herself, and you can see someone like the Art Deco 1930s sort of political cartoony-esque illustration. very metaphysical and symbolic, abstract almost, a lot of dark shades, a lot of very high contrast in the way that the shapes are made. You can see how imagery like this quickly would morph into like war propaganda posters, because it literally did, not, 3 or 4 years later. Oh, and here is the famous Hungarian turul, the Hungarian bird of prey that is so intrinsic to the mythology of the people. Hogy vagytok? Írja nekem, kérlek, mert miért nem? Gevertz Vilmos. Speak, O powerful Hador, speak to thy servant, he cried. Another thunder shook the ground, and a third. After that came silence, so sudden and so deep that it was more terrifying than the storm before. The wind ceased as suddenly as it had come, and the smoke rose once more, straight into the air. Only the path of the fire crept slowly westward, burning high and bright. Then a new sound, a scream piercing and high, rent the silence. It was the scream of an eagle, so shrill, so imperious, that everyone looked up in wonder. They saw a great eagle, holy bird of Hador, circling slowly over the column of smoke. It cried again and hovered for a moment, suspended motionless on its giant wings. Then it plunged headlong into the fire. A gasp. Have no fear, my people. Hador is speaking. Behold. Where one eagle had been before, 2 more were circling. They flew side by side, their great wings touching, circled 3 times and flew off. One to the west, one to the north. Another eagle appeared, as if it had taken shape from the smoke, circled around 7 times, and disappeared to give place to still another. A giant bird, greatest of all. Its tremendous wings caught the glow from the fire. They seemed red as blood. Its voice rose into the piercing, victorious cry as it soared higher and higher and finally flew in a straight line toward the west. Old Nimrod followed its flight with his eyes until it was no bigger than a speck of dust in the sky. Then he turned to his people and said, Hador has spoken. Listen to me, brothers. The first eagle told us that I, your leader for so many years, shall not be with you for long. I shall soon leave to go to the land of my fathers. My place will be taken by 2 leaders, Hunor, Ishmagor. They will lead you nearer the promised land, but they shall not see it. After they are gone, it will be his leader, his son. It will be their son. It will be another leader, and it will be this leader's son, who is the greatest of them all, with the mighty voice and wings red as blood, who will lead you into the promised land. His power will be so great that the earth will tremble and stars will fall down at his approach. His warriors will be more than the grains of sand or blades of grass on the plains. Under the hoofs of their horses, the ground will groan and the air will echo the clanking of their countless swords. He will be called the Scourge of Hador, for nothing can resist his ruthless progress into the land of his destiny. The Scourge of Hador, greatest of all warriors, Attila. Hador has spoken. We will obey. Hador has spoken. We will obey, repeated the listeners in a low murmur. Then the clear voice of a child rang out. But where are Hunor and Magyar? They went away 7 moons ago. They are coming back soon, answered Nimrod. They are. Coming now, cried the child, pointing to the west. 2 riders appeared on the crest of the hill and rode swiftly nearer, skirting the path of the fire. They rode side by side, their spurred boots touching. Their saddles were laden with game. their faces proud and happy. "Twin eagles of Hador," whispered a woman. The crowd stirred in excitement. People repeated the woman's words, first in puzzled whispers, then in a great, joyous shout. "Hunor and Magor, twin eagles of Hador, welcome!" Hunor and Magor leapt from their saddles and ran to old Nimrod. He embraced them silently. To embrace is to hug, it's to grab, it's to hold. After a moment, Hunor lifted his head and looked intently into his father's face. "Father, you are pale and trembling. What has happened?" He made a sweeping gesture with his hand. "The people here, the fire, the path, it met us far, far beyond the hills. Tell us the meaning of it." Old Nimrod smiled. "I will tell you, my son, but I see that you have had a good hunt. You have brought game. Our people are hungry. Let us have a feast." At his signal, men sprang forward and unloaded the game from their saddles. Soon huge fires were burning, and the smell of roasting meat, of deer, wild boar, and rabbits filled the air. The worst pangs of hunger appeased, people began to sing and laugh. By the time the full round moon sailed into view, it looked down on a happy, boisterous scene, a boisterous Lakoma. Hunger and terror were forgotten once more. Young men of the tribe were dancing around the fire, the wild dance of lucky hunters. Women sang and children scampered around like bouncing rabbits. What do bouncing rabbits do? They scamper. Kate Seredy teaching the English language. Imagine kids back in 1937. They must have been so damn smart. No iPhones, no technology. They're just learning the word scamper. Only old Nimrod was quiet and thoughtful. He had not touched food or drink, but listened intently to the talk of Hunor and Magor, and answered their eager questions. When finally the merrymaking, think just like Lord of the Rings party at the Hobbit scene, merrymaking. When finally the merrymaking passed its peak, he walked slowly up the altar steps. He held up his hand, commanding silence, and then he began to speak. "My people, you have seen the sun set on a day so portentous that it will be remembered long after we, who have been part of it, are dust and ashes. Before the pale white sister of the sun disappears behind the mountains, you will swear obedience to your new leaders, Hunor and Magor. It is seldom that Hador, the powerful, speaks as clearly as he has spoken tonight, so clearly that even a child can understand his words. All of you have seen and heard, and all of you will obey. There is one more thing you must know. Hunor and Magor will tell you the story of their travels of 7 moons. It is the final proof that they were chosen to be your leaders." His 2 sons stepped up and stood by his side. They were very tall and powerful, but old Nimrod towered over them as a majestic old oak towers over young saplings. At the sight of the 3 gigantic figures illuminated by the pale white light of the moon, a murmur of awe rose from the crowd. Then Hunor began his story. 7 moons ago, a miraculous white stag appeared on the crest of the hill. He was white as the driven snow, and bigger than any stag ever seen by man. He waited until we were so close to him that we thought we could touch him with our hands. Then he spun around and leaped away as lightly as sunlight leaps over running water. His legs were slim as the branches of white birch, and he ran swifter than the wind. All night he ran through forests and plains, across rivers and over mountains, and we rode after him as we had never ridden before. The hoofs of our horses never touched the ground. We soared over valleys and left mountains far below us. When morning came, the white stag stopped on the edge of a misty blue lake. As he stopped, our horses fell back, exhausted. They stumbled and snorted and would not move again. The white stag pawed the ground. To paw is just what it sounds like. You're pawing the ground. The white stag pawed the ground where he stood and shook his antlers. Then he disappeared in the floating mist over the water. All that day we searched for him. We did not see him again. We only found the place where he had pawed the ground. There were 7 deep rifts in the ground, cut deep and wide as no living beast could cut them. And we saw that the blue lake was full of fish, the green meadows alive with rabbits, the forests around it teeming with deer and other big game. Look at Hunor, look at Magor, look at Nimrod, cutting a commanding presence. I mean, that's something I'm interested in discussing with you after, is the idea of imagery and symbolism that Kate Seredy is putting into this story, this origin story of Hunor and Magor and Nimrod. And look at this miraculous Chota Sarvas role. The hind legs, they're almost human-like in her illustration. A very cosmic allegory. We think of the cosmos as such a modern sci-fi laced concept, but really the cosmos, they were always around. Even back in the ancient past, space was still there. And the conception of the cosmos was moreover laced with the conception of reality. So before you had technology, and when you're thinking of the distant far beyond, what does it look like? If you don't know what technology or modern technology, I shouldn't say technology, but modern technology, computer technology is, then instead of projecting that into space, you're probably going to project something a little bit more, mystical into space. And that's where the heavens come into play. We all think, before I get carried away here, but we all think, what is this like computational, gravitational black hole physics that's going on in outer space? The black holes, only the astrologers and the astrophysicists really know what's going on. No, they don't. Just the same way that the priests back then didn't really know. It's all theoretical. They just have different tools and different mathematical functions to grasp the reality of the situation now, but it still falls a good measure below what is actuality. Or does it? Maybe our own perceptions are reality. Oh, look at this. Look at Hunor and Magor. Look at them riding their beautiful black stallions. The whole imagery of the klasszikus Magyar Lóias, the horse archer. So wonderful. So well captured. And here we have an illustration of the dying Nimrod and Hunor and Magor weeping. This might be a little bit of a, let's just say, a premonition or a harbinger, word of the day, harbinger. A harbinger is basically what is to come. A symbol, a harbinger. Chekhov's gun, Peldaul. There were trees heavy with fruit, and the air was sweet with the breath of beautiful flowers. We saw that in the land there would be room and food for all of us. We rested there for a short time, then started back. The white stag had led us there in one night. It took us 7 moons to come back again. While Hunor told his story, the listeners had left their fires and crowded closer and closer until they were standing in a tight ring around the altar. Now old Nimrod mounted to the very highest step, Leg Magashab Lepchu, so close to the still smoke glowing embers that he seemed enveloped in a red mist. His face was pale and haggard, and there was a far-seeing, piercing look in his eyes. In one hand he held his war club, in the other his bow and his arrow. These he held out to his sons, who, kneeling before him, took them from his hands, and then he spoke. "My work is done. Tomorrow you will go forth to lead your people toward the promised land. Twin eagles of Hador, Hunor, and Magor, go and fulfill the will of God. His eyes closed as he uttered these last words. Then, with a crash like that of a fallen tree, he fell on the highest step of the altar. Women wailed, the crowd gasped in horror, and children started to cry. But sounds of horror and mourning were drowned by a tremendous shout from the young warriors and hunters. "Long live Hunor and Magyar, twin eagles of Hador." The two brothers remained kneeling by their dead father's side for long minutes. Then they arose. Magor turned to the tribe. "Light the torches of the dead," he commanded. One by one, the warriors stepped to the dying embers and lighted pitch-coated torches. Soon there were hundreds of them burning around the altar. The whole valley seemed aflame once more, and black smoke coiled upward, blotting out the sky. To blot something, it's like an ink blot. Blotting completely, it's opaque, it's black. Fekete, you can't see through these blots. Hunor and Magor, each with a burning torch, stood by the body of Nimrod. Hunor then lifted his voice. "Light up the world, my torch. Shine brighter, O moon, stars, and sun. Hold awake over Nimrod, mighty hunter before the Lord. Shed bitter tears, O clouds, soil, tree, and grass. Shed bitter tears for Nimrod, mighty hunter before the Lord. Bow your heads, all you living, bow your heads to Nimrod, mighty hunter before the Lord. Then cheer and dance and rejoice, all you living, shine brighter, moon and stars and sun, cry tears of joy. Clouds, soil, trees, and grass, for now he is soaring over the happy meadows, for he has not taken shame but glory to lay before Hador, the powerful God." Everyone repeated, "He is taking not shame but glory to lay before Hador, the powerful God." Now Hunor and Magor fastened their torches. To fasten something is to fix it in place. You fasten perhaps a door handle to a door. You fasten your seatbelt. You fasten anything that you want to stick and have it stay there. So they fastened their torches to the altar stones. All others were extinguished. Magor stepped forward and cried, "Move the mountains, men! Move the rocks and the soil with your bare hands, and build a mighty tomb for the mighty hunter." In the eerie light of white moon and flickering torches, their immense task began. Men tore boulders from the mountainside and rolled them to the altar. Women and children carried clay from the river in their hands. Rocks were fitted together with the clay until they formed a gigantic mound over the altar, a mound shaped like an inverted cup. Ho, look at this altar. Look what they have built in this beautiful, abstract, black and white 1930s Art Deco illustration by Kate Sarady. Genius. The men, look at these men moving their mountains and boulders. A beautiful, beautiful, beautiful illustration. Beautifully tragic, perhaps, these poor suckers. Let's see how many more pages we have in the chapter. How many more? Oh, just one. Last page, Utasho. And then we'll have a little discussion. I can't wait. I can't wait to see you on the other side, folks. Get your questions ready. Tapering toward the top and hollow inside. Finally, there was only a small opening on the top through which the glow of smoke and torches poured. Only then did Hunor speak again. "Go and rest, brothers, until the sun comes up. With the sun we shall go forward toward the west." The two brothers were left alone. They stayed by their father's grave for the rest of the night, watching the moon go down beyond the hills, watching the first faint glow of a new day in the easterly sky. With the growing light came sounds of the awakening camp. Magor roused himself out of his deep thoughts and touched his brother's shoulder. "The tribe is ready. We must go now." The women came first, leading the children. Everyone had a flower in her hand. Silently they passed by the grave and dropped their flowers at its base. The men came next, leading their horses. Everyone stopped to place a gift on the grave, an arrow, a wooden cup, a leather pouch, a favorite club. All passed, and slowly the caravan began to move westward, following the now blackened path of fire. Hunor then shouldered a big square rock and walked slowly, laboriously, to the top of the mound. Magar followed. They rolled the rock over the opening, sealing it. They lifted their hunting bugles to their lips. A proud, triumphant tune rent the still air and echoed from the mountains 1,000-fold, until its voice seemed to beat against the very sky. A bugle call of victory and last tribute to Nimrod, mighty hunter before the Lord. Oh my God, goosebumps. Goosebumps. Look at that. Hunor and Magor singling out their father for the praise of the nation. This man, this Nimrod, this gigantic king who had been apparently so meaningful to the people, or at least meaningful to Hunor and Magor. I mean, they might just be forcing these people to do this with armed guards behind them saying, you better pray for my dad. Or maybe perhaps this is actually a society that reveres its leaders and has great respect for them. And you imagine with the type of imagery that Kate Seredy paints that it's probably the latter, because Hunor and Magor and Nimrod, they don't really seem to need much to get the people to feel inspired by them. It's merely their presence, their figurehead as this enormous, strength-filled centerpiece of the society. It's quite fascinating, actually. I feel like it's a little bit indicative towards, perhaps the Hungarian leadership philosophy over history, at least, which is sort of to follow the one who will say that they're the strongest. Now, that's not always what has happened, but it is perhaps slightly more infused into the metaphorical DNA of the people, and you can see it stemming from this origin story of Hunor and Magor. And it's such a marvelous story, the way that Kate Seredy is able to paint this picture and this transition phase from old leadership to new leadership, from the one giant Nimrod split into his two sons, who I think as the story goes on will have part of their personality infused by this Nimrod character. So I'm quite interested to hear what you guys think. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, please feel free. Irja Nekem, feel free to join on budapest.fm/Willie. You can join in on the video chat. I think that I just have a few more thoughts to say about this story with Hunor and Magor and Nimrod, and then perhaps we'll finish off with some Petufi poetry and call it, or perhaps a Magyar Netmesek. Actually, I think definitely a Magyar Netmesek, a Magyar folktale would be absolutely delightful. But this Hunor and this Magor story, I'm very interested to delve deeper into it, because we have such a wonderful beginning. I mean, can you really get a more magnificent, epic picture of what's going on here? Basically, just to recap, we have Hunor and we have Magor, and they had seen this miraculous stag with their father, and they followed it for 7 days and 7 nights, and now they come back to tell their people, this stag led us somewhere miraculous. It's time that we leave this barren hellscape of our old kingdom and we go venture further through the dangers of what lies beyond. And imagine back then moving all of your people from one place that they called home to another. I mean, it's almost something that we can't really relate to today. We can relate to it as individuals, but as societies, as entire societies, it's hard to imagine collectivizing and moving and uprooting your entire lives, unless you happen to be born in perhaps the wrong place, because that actually does happen in the modern day all the time. It's usually in a situation of refugee or a situation of desperation. But now, as the population has expanded around the world, it's kind of difficult to go resettle a territory, since all the space is pretty much taken up, or at least if it's not taken up, It's demarcated by artificial lines that are known as nation states. Back then, maybe someone called this village their own, maybe someone else called that village their own, but the scope of land that you would need to comprise a nation or a country, that was just not feasible. So, as Hunor and Magor and their people go and settle these lands, and as the Hungarians come back some centuries later in the Honfoglalás, we see this process actually taking place in reality. And now, let's read a little bit of Magyar Népmesék. By the way, word of that whole story that I like the best right at the end there, laboriously. To do something laboriously is to do it with labor. And laboriously is what's known as an adverb. The word laborious is an adjective. You can describe something as laborious. It's, I think in Hungarian, nyelvtan? No, that's grammar. I forget the word. What's the word for adjective in Hungarian? If anyone could help me out, just write it in the comments. But either way, laborious is an adjective. Laboriously is an adverb. And adverbs almost always just add the ly because you're describing the action. It's an adjective for the action. You're walking and you're doing the walking laboriously. You can't be walking laborious. You have to be walking laboriously. So, I think we'll have time for one Hungarian folktale, a Magyar Népmesék. I will read it in Hungarian. If you have any, desire to come join along, feel free. What are we going to pick? What are we going to do? Let's read some Hungarian because I'm here with you. We're reading all these words and we don't know what they mean, but we'll figure it out. It might not be clean. What are we going to pick? What are we going to do? I don't really know. And how about you? These pages are loose. They're going to fall apart, but I'll stop at one and then we're going to start. Oh, here we are. Wow, look at this. Unbelievable. We got some color in this book. Who knew? Who knew? They had to parcel it out nice and spread apart back in the day. Wow, this is cool. Nagyon érdekes. Az ördög ajándéka. I think that's like the devil gift. Let's do this one. Volt egyszer egy birkás, aki a birkák után járva mindig küldögetett, sajnálta az időt elpottyázni, hogy semmit se tegyen. Hát egyszer egy nap zacskót kötött. Oda ment hozzá egy ördög, s kérdi, mit kötsz, te birkás? Én olyan zacskót kötök, hogy a világon, aki ördög van, mind belekötöm. Jó, csak engem bele ne köss, mondta az ördög. És ott hagyta. Másnap megint csak kötött a juhász. Oda ment egy másik ördög, az is csak kérdezi tőle. Mit kötsz, te birkás? Én olyan zacskót kötök, hogy a világon, aki ördög van, mind belekötöm. No jó, csak engem bele ne köss. És az is ott hagyta. Harmadik nap is csak kötögetett. Akkor meg oda ment hozzá egy sánta ördög, annak a két előbeni ördögnek az apja. Az is kérdezi tőle. Mit kötsz, te birkás? Én olyan zacskót kötök, hogy a világon, aki sánta ördög van, azt én minden belekötöm. No, csak engem bele ne köss, adok, amit kívánsz. Gyere velem hoz egy tarisznyát, megtöltöm pénzzel, aranyjal, ezüsttel, amint kívánod. Nem kell nekem a pénzet. Van nekem magamnak is, felelte a birkás. Hát mit kívánsz? Adjál nekem egy olyan sípot, hogy aki annak a szólását meghallja, mindjárt a táncra induljon. Akkor adott neki az ördög egy olyan sípot. Hát mindjárt, miért az ördög elment, a birkás belefült. Megpróbálta, hogy csak ugyan igaz ez. A birkák meghallottak, mindjárt táncra indultak. Attól fogva minden nap követte a birkát. Minden nap megtáncoltatta. Ugyannyira, hogy 10 óra felé már mind összeálltak deleni. Az uraság meg naponként ürült szinte. Ennyi, de jó birkásom van, mondtam magában, jól tartotta a birkákat. Összeálltak deleni. Don't know what's going on. Utóbb egy pap ment arra, a birkás fújta akkor isebb a szipot. Az is meghallotta, az is mindjárt táncra indult. Bele táncoltatta a birkás a tüskébe, úgyhogy meg a reverendát is leszette. Könyörgött a pap, hogy csak ne táncoltassa, nekiadja a breviáriumát is, de a birkás annál inkább csak fújta. Hát amikor kiszabadult a pap tőle, bement az ursághoz, bepanaszolta. Az uraság elment, hogy megnézni, csak ugyan igaz-e, amit a birkás hatalmáról hallott. Hát amikor ment az uraság, akkor is épp táncoltatta a birkás a birkákat. Mikor az uraság meghallotta a sípot, egyre sebesebben nyárgalt még. A hintóról is leugrott, ott kellett neki is táncolni. Jól megtáncoltatta a birkás az uraságot. Az uraság elment haza, meg haragudott a birkásra, és fel akarta akasztani. Be is kísértek a birkást a sírálomházba, onnan meg a bittofa alá. De a sípot elvették tőle, mikor már odállították szépen az akasztófa alá. Hát a birkás felesége úgy távolosan ment a mezőben, egy dűlő után. Akkor a birkás megkérte az urakat, hogy őneki egy kerese volna, ha megengednek. Mi az? Ott megy az ő felesége. Ereszek el odahoza, hogy hát szólhasson egyet vele utoljára. Megengedték. Akkor oda ment a feleséghez, mindjárt kezdett, nyújtott neki az meg a markába, adta neki a sípot. Az urok semmit sem vettek észre, mikor jut a feleségétől vissza ahhoz a népséghez, belefújt a sípba. Még a hóhér is leugrott a bittofáról, mint táncoltatta, hazáig táncoltatta őket. Wow. Okay. The birkás and the ördög. Egészség to that. Well, I think that we should probably finish off with a little bit of poetry. That one almost blew me over down the hill and took me for a ride. So Petőfi Sándor. Oh, how about this? Forradalom. Forradalom. That means revolution. Haloványul a gyáva számra. Dalom. Vihárodnak előjele forradalom. Szomorúk az idők, a napok feketek. Odahagytak atyáid a nemzet, a nép. Csak azért szakítád le bilincseidet, hogy újabb nehezebb van emesze kezed. Földi még beteg arcodra az egykori por, s íme sorsod újonnan a porba tipor. Nem a sors, de saját fiaid. A karátja mi újra lejállán csonyít. Ez a vétek, ami cudor, és iszonyúbb legyen érte az égi bosszú. Leállazol-e, ó háza szent fejedet? Piszok, ülje, a hír koszorúdja helyet. Mielőtt az erőszak igába fogad, kaszabol le hazám, nyakadat te magad. Tegye láncra a zsának a holttetemet, diádama legyen temető menet. hol elasnak a dom neki trónján legyen, s gyakoroljon erőt Siri ferge iden. De te, ó háza, nem hagyod el magadat, haragod tűze a cájdon kigülladt. Kezed ott van a kardon, a markolaton, ki fog élni, ha nem te dicsőn szabadon. Szaporán ide, kedvesem, ajkáidat, se ti fiú, szaporán ide a poharat. Mire elfogy a bor, mire csatanacsok, jeládásra emelhetik a labagot. Haloványul a gyáva szávamra talom, vihárodnak előjele forradalom. Pest, 1848, the eve of forradalom, the eve of revolution, Petőfi Sándor. Petőfi Sándor, Kukorica Vilmos, Kukorica Jáncsi, Hunor és Mágor, Szeredi Két. Azt hiszem nagyon-nagyon érdekes, és köszönöm szépen mindenkinek, mert nekem nagyon-nagyon jó kell, amikor kell olvasni nektek, mert most kell gondolni. Nem különböző, mint a normális, mert most két fejem, egy fej, olvasok fej, más fej, gondolok fej, és most nagyon ős történet, ős régi történet, régi író, régi költő, régi vers, régi. Hunor és Mágor. Nagyon érdekes történet nekem. Petőfi Sándor. Gyönyörű költő. És most azt hiszem, kell gondolni. Ez a nap, nem ez a nap, the present. We have to think about the present a little bit differently. And try to think about how we can recapture the beauty of the past while moving into the future. We've had this sort of great reset, this coronavirus, and we think about it as a great reset, a conspiracy theory. This is the great reset, what they say. But either way, whether it's a conspiracy or not, it is a reset on life. And when you put the game back in the cartridge into the machine, what's going to be on the screen? And really, that's for the player to determine. So good luck. And I wish you all the best on this week that lays ahead, and the month, and the rest of the year, the final stretch as the leaves begin to fall, and we head into the cold of winter, while warming each other up by the fire. I'll see you soon. Egeshegadra.